They show up before sunrise. While most people are still sleeping, they're already moving through neighborhoods with purpose and coordination. They pull people out of homes. Quickly and efficiently, they separate parents from children. Children are crying, families are fragmenting in real time as people are taken away. They separate families and they document everything that happens. They process the people they've taken and then they drive away to do it again the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. How do they keep doing this? How do ordinary people show up day after day to a job that fundamentally involves tearing families apart? Not robots incapable of feeling, not sociopaths who enjoy causing harm, ordinary people, regular people, people with their own families waiting at home, people who have normal conversations and normal lives completely outside of work hours. Yet somehow they keep showing up to do this work, they keep coming back, they keep repeating these actions day after day. How do they manage that? How is that even psychologically possible? This question absolutely deserves a real answer. When you try to understand how this is possible, two very different explanations emerge, and both of them actually sound reasonable when you first hear them laid out. One explanation goes like this: these are law enforcement officers doing their job, they have a profession, there are laws on the books and there are procedures that need to be followed. Someone has to enforce immigration law and these people chose that line of work. They're professionals doing what the system requires them to do. They're not necessarily bad people, they're just executing the job they were hired to execute. The other explanation sounds completely different. These are people who are willing to separate families for a paycheck. These are people who see a child crying and they don't feel moved to stop. These are people who made a conscious choice to do this work because something inside them allows them to cause that kind of harm. They could have chosen other jobs, but they chose this one specifically. Both of these explanations seem to make sense when you think about them. One frames them as neutral professionals following the rules and procedures of their job. The other frames them as people who are fundamentally different from most of us, people with a different moral capacity. One says the work is the problem, the other says the person is the problem. And when you listen to both explanations carefully, they both feel plausible. They both seem to fit some of the facts you observe, but they're pointing at two completely different versions of the same people. But here's where it gets strange when you actually look at the details. A significant number of these immigration agents come from immigrant families themselves. They grew up in immigrant communities, they speak the languages, they know the culture. Some of them are enforcing immigration law against people from their own neighborhoods, people they might have gone to school with. If the first explanation was complete, if these were just neutral professionals following procedures, then their background shouldn't matter. A procedure is a procedure, a job is a job. But it does seem to matter, and yet they keep showing up anyway. If the second explanation was complete, if these were people fundamentally different, people who enjoy causing harm, then their own immigrant background wouldn't make sense. You wouldn't expect someone from that background to choose this work. But they did choose it, or at least they're doing it. So neither explanation fully fits. They're not purely neutral professionals, but they don't seem like people who are naturally cruel or indifferent to suffering either. And yet they keep showing up, day after day. They keep returning to work that involves tearing families apart even though their own families came through similar experiences. So the question becomes different. This isn't about whether the person is good or bad. This isn't about whether the work is just or unjust. The question becomes, what is it about their situation that allows them to keep doing this? What has to be true about someone's position for them to show up repeatedly to work that contradicts their own background and their own understanding of harm? So here's what we have to ask ourselves now. Are these people uniquely cold, uniquely capable of compartmentalizing? Do they have some kind of emotional capacity that's different from most people? Or is something about their specific situation enabling this behavior? Is something about their position making it possible for them to keep doing this work? Think about it differently for a moment. If you put any person in a certain kind of position where their job is their primary source of stability, where losing this job means losing health insurance and pension and financial security, would they be more willing to perform difficult tasks? If you put any person in a position where they receive orders from above and refusing those orders means losing their employment, would they be more likely to follow through even when those tasks conflict with their own values? If you put any person in a situation where they only see the action they perform but never see the consequences that follow, where the family separation happens somewhere else, handled by someone else, would that make the action easier to repeat? The question isn't really about whether these people are good or bad anymore. The question becomes, what are the conditions that would make it possible for an ordinary person to keep showing up to this work? What has to be true about their circumstances for them to sustain this over time? Is the person choosing the work, or is the work choosing the person because of where they're positioned? Here's what we know about their actual position. These people are living in economic precarity. They don't have wealth, they don't have generational security. What they have is a government job, and that government job provides things that are very difficult to get elsewhere. A stable paycheck, health insurance, a pension, job security that most private sector work doesn't offer. Without this job, their economic stability disappears. So this job isn't just work, this job is the floor beneath their feet, the difference between security and vulnerability. Now add this to the picture, they're not in a position to make decisions about what they do. They receive orders from above, the addresses they raid come from higher up in the chain, the targets are assigned to them. If they refuse an assignment, they don't get to keep the job that provides their security. So they're not choosing each specific action, they're choosing to keep the job that requires them to perform these actions. And once you've made that choice, the specific actions become mandatory rather than optional. But here's the crucial part, they never see what happens after. After they take someone into custody and drive away, what happens to that family? Where do the children go? What does family separation actually mean in real terms? That's someone else's department. That's handled by immigration officials, by courts, by detention facilities. The consequences belong to someone else's jurisdiction. They see the action, they perform the action, but they don't see the result. The family that's separated, the children crying in a detention facility, the deported parent in another country, they don't witness any of that. It's not part of their day. Let me put it this way, imagine a slaughterhouse. The person who kills the animal sees that specific action, but they don't see the consumer eating the meat. They don't see the family dinner table. They don't see the result of their work. Meanwhile, the consumer sees the meal but never sees the killing. The action and the consequence belong to different people. That separation means each person can focus on their part without confronting the whole picture. When the action and the consequence are separated like that, when the person performing the action never witnesses the result, the action becomes easier to repeat. You can show up the next day because you're not carrying the full weight of what you caused, you're only carrying your part of it. That's what's happening here. These agents are in a position where their economic survival depends on this job. They receive orders they can't refuse, and the consequences of their actions are hidden from them by institutional design. The result is that ordinary people can keep showing up to do extraordinary harm because they're in a position where the harm is compartmentalized away from them. Let's step back and look at the whole picture now. You see them showing up before sunrise, you see them pulling people out of homes, you see them separating families day after day. That's where this started. That's the action you were trying to understand. But now we can see the actual conditions that make those actions sustainable. It wasn't a mystery of personality. It wasn't a question of whether these people are good or bad. It wasn't about them being uniquely cold or uniquely cruel. It was about position and what that position makes possible and sustainable. These agents are living in economic precarity where this job is their only reliable source of stability. They have a pension and health insurance and security that would be very difficult to find elsewhere. Without this job, their economic position becomes fragile. And because they receive orders from above that they can't refuse without losing that security, they're in a position where compliance becomes mandatory rather than optional. But here's what makes it sustainable over time: they don't see the consequences. The family separation happens, they perform their part of it. But what happens to those families after the detention, the heartbreak, the deportation, the permanent separation? That's handled by other departments. That's someone else's responsibility. They only see the action they perform, they never see the result. When the action and the consequence belong to different people, when the person performing the action never witnesses the result, that action becomes easier to repeat indefinitely. It's not that they're heartless, it's not that they don't care, it's that the system is designed so they don't have to see what they cause. The compartmentalization allows ordinary people to keep performing extraordinary harm. They're not uniquely capable of causing pain, they're positioned in a way where the pain is hidden from them. The action is theirs, the result belongs to someone else. That's not a personality trait, that's a structural arrangement. When you understand this, you're not understanding why cruel people exist. You're understanding how systems make it possible for ordinary people to keep doing harmful work without bearing the full weight of what they're causing. It's not about the person, it's about what their position allows them to not see. Here's what we learn from this. When the action and the consequence belong to different people, the action becomes easier to repeat. That's it. That's the rule we see. It's not about whether someone is a good person or a bad person. Good people exist everywhere. People everywhere have conscience and empathy and the capacity to feel what others feel. The real puzzle is who has to witness the consequence of their actions, who sees the full picture of what they cause, who carries the weight of the result. Because when that weight is compartmentalized, when the person performing the action never sees what happens next, something changes. The psychological burden becomes lighter. The action becomes routine. You can show up the next day because you're not being crushed by the full reality of what you caused. It's the same principle that allows consumers to eat meat without seeing the slaughterhouse. It's the same principle that allows bureaucrats to process paperwork that destroys lives without confronting those lives. It's the same principle that allows soldiers to follow orders that result in deaths they never see. The compassion is real in all of these cases. The people performing these actions often do have conscience, but the system is designed so they don't have to confront the consequence. The consequence is someone else's problem to witness and carry. When you see ICE agents showing up day after day to separate families, you're not seeing people who are uniquely capable of harming others. You're seeing people in a position where the harm is hidden from them by design. That doesn't make the harm less real. It doesn't make the separation less devastating to the families experiencing it. It just means you're seeing what's possible when action and consequence are separated systematically. The action is sustainable precisely because the person performing it doesn't have to live with what it causes. It's not that they're heartless, it's not that they don't care, it's that the system is designed so they don't have to see what they cause. The compartmentalization allows ordinary people to keep performing extraordinary harm. They're not uniquely capable of causing pain, they're positioned in a way where the pain is hidden from them. The action is theirs, the result belongs to someone else. That's not a personality trait, that's a structural arrangement. When you understand this, you're not understanding why cruel people exist. You're understanding how systems make it possible for ordinary people to keep doing harmful work without bearing the full weight of what they're causing. It's not about the person, it's about what their position allows them to not see. So when you see them showing up before sunrise, when you see them pulling people out of homes, when you see them separating families and then driving away to do it again the next day, you're not looking at uniquely cold people. You're looking at people in a position where their economic survival depends on this job. They're people who receive orders they can't refuse without losing their security. You're looking at people positioned in a system where the consequences of their actions are hidden from them. They're not monsters, they're not sadists who enjoy causing pain. They're not fundamentally different from most people in their capacity for conscience. They're people whose own families came through immigration struggles. They're people who understand what separation means, and yet they keep showing up because refusing means losing the stability that their families depend on. The action is theirs, but the consequence belongs to someone else. The child separated from their parent, that's someone else's problem to manage. The family deported, that's someone else's jurisdiction. The devastation that results, they don't witness it, they don't have to carry it. And that's what makes it sustainable. That's what allows ordinary people to keep doing this work day after day. You felt confusion about how they manage to keep doing this. Now you know. It's not about them being special people with special capacity for harm. It's about them being in a position where the harm is compartmentalized away from them. It's about a system designed so they only see their action and never see the result. The harm is absolutely real. The families experiencing it are absolutely devastated. The separation is absolutely devastating and permanent for many of them. But the person performing the action doesn't have to carry that weight because the system ensures they never witness it. That's not a personality, that's a position. That's how systems sustain themselves, by separating those who act from those who suffer the consequences.